Hi, this is Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the Future of Education. It is Monday, February 1st, 2010, and we're delighted to have Karen Cator here. Hi, Karen.
Hello, nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Sure, appreciate it. Karen is the Director of the Office of Education Technology for the U.S. Department of Education, and we're going to talk today about the National Education Plan, the 2010 plan. The Future of Education is sponsored in part by my employer, Illuminate, now Blackboard Collaborate. The project I work on is called Learn Central. It's a free social network for educators, as fate would have it, that has Illuminate baked in. We sure hope that you'll come and enjoy using it. We've especially made it particularly for educators. Coming up on the Future of Education tomorrow, David Wiley talks about open education. On Thursday, Karen Hume talks about her book, Tuned Out, and David Perkins on Making Learning Whole, Kevin Kelly on What Technology Wants. John C.D. Brown comes on the 22nd to talk about his new book, The New Culture of Learning. You can see lots more fun there. I don't think anything's been added since our last few shows, but Mitch Resnick coming up, which should be a lot of fun. Don Smithmeyer on crowdsourced learning and the new Sophia program. Really should be interesting. Anyway, we hope there's something there that you're interested in hearing about. If you've missed the show, they're all recorded, both in the full Illuminate version and MP3 form. There's a podcast stream. We did talk last week to Michael Horn, Gary Stager, and then before that, Barnett Berry, Yong Zhao, Will Richardson, Ira David Sokol, Alfie Cohn. Again, we hope there's something there that's of interest to you. It's a lot of fun. futureofeducation.com. Look for the link to previous shows. Two educational technology events coming up where we get to do a lot of crowdsourcing activity. The first is the Q Conference in Palm Springs in March. We have an EduBloggerCon. That's a free event for anybody who wants to come talk about social media and education. That's on March 16th from 4 to 8 p.m. You do not need to be registered for Q to attend. But if you are registered for Q and you stay, we will also have a Bloggers Cafe. And we'll be doing Q Unplugged again this year, where anybody who wants to can present. There's a presentation area, and we will stream it out. So if you've always wanted to present at Q, where there's something new and topical, please feel free to go to qunplugged.com, sign up there. Also coming up at ISTE, our annual Big EduBloggerCon, all day Saturday, the 25th of June. Always a lot of fun. Hope that you'll consider joining us for that. We are in Philadelphia again, which should just be a blast. Of course, the Bloggers Cafe, what we think of as being the most popular place at ISTE, will be there at ISTE as well, and ISTE Unplugged, a similar unconferencey kind of streaming activity where if you want to present, you may. So hope you'll consider one of those two events. If this is your first time at Illuminate, we do like you to participate. You can see that you have an ability to chat in the chat area. With a group of this size, it's always good to go up to View Layouts and switch yourself to the wide layout. It's a lot easier to see the chat in the wide layout. And just because you put something in chat doesn't mean that Karen or I will actually see it. It's hard to concentrate and do all of this. So if we miss a question, please feel free to post it again. It does help to keep the chat related to the interview. So a lot of side chatter can often be distracting, so we encourage you to try and keep that at a minimum. At the bottom of the participant window, you'll notice some emoticons: smiley face, clapping hand, confused look, thumbs down. Those are a lot of fun to express your feelings during the show. We expect a lot of smiley faces, of course, and clapping. To the left of those emoticons is a hand with a green up arrow, and that allows you to raise your hand. And when we go to Q&A, you can raise your hand, and we will give you the microphone. If you'd like to ask a question through the microphone on your computer or your headset, please be sure to go up to Tools, Audio, and run the Audio Setup Wizard now to make sure that your microphone is configured correctly. Now we're going to give you a chance to indicate where you're participating from. Expect that this will be a largely United States audience, but you never know. A lot of fun for you to put a shout out in the chat. Let us know where you are, what the time and the temperature are. So we've got Asia, we've got Europe, we've got South America, United States, Alaska. There was a fair amount of Twitter chatter about this interview, Karen. I think you should feel good about that.
A lot of people from all over the place, that's for sure. I see a lot of names I recognize from up there in Alaska and out in California and points between here and there.
Wherever you are participating from, we're sure glad you've joined us. If you're listening to the recording, thanks so much for taking the time. So Karen, I read a lot of this report. I can't say that I read all of it. It was pretty dense for me. I mean, I had to really pay attention. And maybe about 4 hours in, I skipped some pages. I'm really interested in the process and sort of the vision of the document. But before we get to that, I'd like to know a little bit more about you. So could you give us sort of a brief biography for yourself?
Sure, I could give you the quick summary. Is I was 17 years in public education in Alaska. After growing up and going to high school, college in Massachusetts, went to Alaska, spent 17 years there in public education. Then I went to California and spent 12 years at Apple, and now I've been in federal government for a year and 2 months. So that's the quick version. But my first degree was early childhood education, and I've taught everything through college courses, and that's the quick version.
Are there any personal passions of yours that come out in this report?
I would just say my personal passion is for engaging, inspiring, interesting learning environments, and that was really the guiding force, I would say, is how do we really get kids to lean forward, pay attention, get involved, get engaged, really focus in on what they're interested in, what will bring them to the table of learning, so to speak. So I would say, that totally intersects with my own personal passions. I guess through my whole career, I've had it's always been hard to tell where my work life and kind of personal and social life start and stop. I've always been lucky to have great friends that I've worked with, and lots of people that I've collaborated with over the years. I see Skip by out there on the screen, and we worked together in the, late 80s, I guess. And so it's been a great ride, and it continues to be. And so I would say that the plan is really kind of a point-in-time compilation, but more importantly, the plan was the work of just an entire large population of people who either worked intensively on it, or weighed in on it, or provided ideas or case studies or research projects, or things they were doing in their classroom. It really stood on the shoulders of some just amazing giants out there, and really is a piece of work that's a point in time. It's a point in time that says we are absolutely ready to leverage the power of technology to totally transform the American education system.
So before we move there, I wanted to ask you one more question about your own career. So teaching is often described as a very isolating experience. Then you moved to Apple, which is a very intense business environment, and now a more bureaucratic environment. Did Apple serve you well in transitioning to the kinds of ways in which things get done in a government position?
That's a great question, and I'd have to sort of think about it a little bit, but I guess right off the top of my head, first of all, my whole career has been, I would say, a very social career, working with a lot of different people. I've always been fascinated at with the kind of evolution of ideas, and it's hard to track back which conversations or which, what input had, provided different inspiration and that kind of thing. So I think that even though teachers close their door and go into their classroom, I think that overall it is quite an interactive occupation, even though we sort of think that it's more isolating. But so I would say, so that's the first thing I would say is just all of it. But the second thing I would say is that I guess I've always just tried to get things done in whatever environment I'm in. So in some places, in some instances, it was harder to get things done at Apple because there were a lot of, some of the rules and regulations in place. And in some cases, it's harder to get things done in government with different rules and regulations. But I think overall, I've been very lucky to always be in environments where people around me are very committed to doing the right thing and getting good work done. So, sometimes I've had to kind of picture it like use the metaphorical river where, you're flowing downstream and you come upon boulders and you sort of figure out how to flow around them. And so that's kind of been a metaphor that's guided my work as well.
So how does the report differ in its objectives or its findings from the 2004 plan?
The 2004 plan was a wholly different document. It was very lightweight. I think if you've seen it, so you probably wouldn't spend 4 hours on that document, and then some, and you probably wouldn't skip pages. It was a very lightweight document, and actually over half the document was kind of a point in time look at each of the 50 states. So I think there's really no comparison in terms of kind of the work that was done. This document is, like I said, the work of many, many people. It was a contractor, SRI, that got it started and had a fantastic technical working group of folks that spent a lot of time really discussing and hashing over and doing a lot of writing and reading and researching for it. And the technical working group, you can see who was on that technical working group in the plan. But then it was put on the web, and there was a lot of input, continuous kind of feedback, and like I said, case studies and people's ideas and examples. But I think the design really was focused on how do we lay out a broad vision, a big, tall, broad vision for transforming American education and, as it says, learning powered by technology, and make sure that it's absolutely tied to the ground with reality, the reality of teachers, the reality of students, the reality of anybody in this space. Teacher education really wanted to provide goals, recommendations, and ideas for action that people could really kind of see themselves in and take away right away.
So it's definitely driven by a concern about U.S. achievement and by goals set by President Obama. As you were creating the plan and then talking about it, how much did you look at the technology practices of other countries in order to think about what we do here?
There is so much going on across the world. I think in the case of, I think a lot of people, Chris Dede, for example, is involved with what's happening in other countries. A lot of the people working on the plan pulled in examples from different places around the world. So I would say it definitely was informed by pretty much anything we could get our hands on. A lot of great work through BECTA in the UK has happened over the years, and that's, like I said, standing on the shoulders of giants. That's other work that we looked at. Any research that has been done, looked at research. There's an extensive reference section in the back. But we really also wanted, this has been the United States, the National Education Technology Plan, so we wanted to then ground it in the U.S. education system.
Well, the reason I asked was Yong Zhao has been a guest on the show a couple of times, and there's this sort of tension between are we succeeding or are we failing? Is China growing as a world power because they've opened their markets or because of their education system? And I actually wondered as I read the report, how unique is we tend to be as a country, we tend to be very sort of entrepreneurial, innovative, and unique. And I wondered how unique is this approach to technology and education, or if we were to look at Finland or Singapore, do they have comparable kinds of pushes, or is this sort of part of what makes us unique?
Well, first of all, I want to go back to something you said. I mean, we definitely have a burning platform in education in the United States today. We have about a quarter of our students drop out of school. You know, about 50% of our minority students drop out of school. We have 93 million adults that are undereducated. You know, 44% of the adult population of a state like Michigan, you know, is I would say undereducated. You know, without a high school graduation in their pocket, and we have a lot of work to do. We really cannot continue. The economy suffers. The personal lives of individuals suffer. We do think education is the only way out of poverty. I mean, we have a burning platform. We have an incredible need to quickly and carefully really fix our education system so that way more people can be successful. And not only that, I want to point out that this plan is really it's pre-K through, you know, all the way to career. So we're really thinking about improving the opportunity for every adult to learn. So it's definitely a broad-based plan. So I don't want to lose that we really, now is the time to totally power up the system, because in the current situation we are failing way too many students every single day.
I think that comes through pretty clearly. You give some good statistics that you've given here and in the report as well. You know, actually, there's the phrase sort of we need a revolutionary transformation. There's the discussion of a complete redesign. So I think that comes through pretty well. If I wanted to give the listeners who haven't looked at the report a kind of a sense of how it's organized, there are the 5 core components: learning, assessment, teaching, infrastructure, and productivity. Under each component, you have sort of a model, then goals, and then recommendations. And then you have the kind of action plan getting started now. Did I get that all right?
Pretty close. So each of the chapters, as you said, they have a kind of their whole articulation, lots of examples, and then the goals and recommendations. There's an executive summary. The first part is an executive summary, and at the end of the executive summary is where we added a section that was not in the draft, but enough people said, this is all well and good, but what do we do first? Like, how do we get started? So we added this section called Getting Started Now once we for the final. And then there's kind of this bonus section that's all about research and development and kind of what needs to be invented. What are the grand challenges? How can we really engage and kind of create a much more robust R&D on infrastructure for learning technologies?
So what kind of responses are you getting to the plan?
We've gotten great responses, and someone said to me the other day, actually, one of the comments, I'll tell you, Steve, somebody said it was a page turner, so I don't know, but well, I don't know about that. But we've gotten great responses, and one of the things someone else said the other day was that you know, a lot of times government documents kind of get published and sit on a shelf or whatever, and this one definitely has continued interest. There's so much to it, I think, that it has continued interest, and it you know, we've gotten great feedback. We've gotten great feedback internationally. We've gotten good feedback from organizations such as you know, the school administrators or the you know, different associations. One of the things that I've really tried to do is take technology in education from being kind of a vertical slice. You know, kind of like, you people over there in the technology office, you deal with technology, to being a horizontal slice and really figuring out how to infuse technology across all of the different goals that people are working on. So the people are interested in highly effective teachers and leaders. How can technology help produce and support highly effective teachers and leaders? Whether we're talking about literacy or English language learning or career and technical education or, you know, STEM subjects or special needs students, exceptional students. What are all the different ways that technology can really power up all of those areas and help students be more successful?
Karen, there was a long public vetting process that you described. Even after that, now, have you discovered anything that you wished that you'd addressed, or has anybody made a critique where you felt like, oh, we could have handled that differently?
Not that I can think of. I think we've been able to pretty much stand on what we've published. There's definitely work that can be done. So obviously this isn't a static, like, okay, we published this and now we're done. It's like, okay, we published this, now let's get going. Let's figure out kind of what we need to do. What are the projects? What's the research? What can we stand up that will really create the possibility for people to actually implement these kinds of things.
In the Getting Started Now, I think it's that section, the action plan, there's a lot of convening that will take place, convening different groups to talk about these different issues. So it seems like you feel like that's really important.
Well, part of it is that, so the Getting Started Now was actually also focused on what we can do as federal government. So rather than, so one of the things we've been trying to encourage people to do is to say, how do you see yourselves in this plan? If every state or every district or different entities, professional associations and others, colleges of education, could kind of create their own Getting Started Now, that would be really interesting, because what we did is, for this section, as you'll notice, it's the Department of Education can throughout that. And so one of the things that we can do as a department is pull people together, get the conversations going. We can fund research. We can fund, or we can, kind of focus in on different projects. We can do contracts to do development work and that kind of thing. So the Getting Started Now is really focused on what we can do and what we can support as a department.
So I want to kind of dive into each of the sections. One of the interesting tensions that I felt like the report reflects is the tension between local and sort of higher level or more national, and measuring, and are those measurements used at a local level or even a student level or at a national level. What really stuck out to me in the learning section was putting the students at the center and empowering them to take their control of their own learning. And yet at the same time, it felt like the assessment piece was largely something done to students rather than the students doing themselves. Is that just an inherent tension we have in our desire to try and understand how you put students at the center?
I actually don't think so. I think what we were trying to do with the learning section is, as you say, put the students at the center, figure out how to get the learning opportunity as close and personal to the student as possible. The assessment section, actually, we tried to do the same thing. We tried to say, how can we make sure that any kinds of assessments that are created, and I can say more about that in just a second, but how do we make sure that those things are for the purposes of helping people get better every day? So the whole purpose of the assessment section was to say, let's see if we can get away from this once a year kind of thing and get to, and then people say, okay, well, we'll do, benchmark and, 4 times a year or 8 times a year. And it's like, no, we want to do every 4 minutes or every 8 minutes. Like, how do kids and teachers know minute by minute kind of how they're doing, and how do we really increase and improve the feedback loops as close to the ground as possible, make it as personal as possible. And all of the people on this call, I know, already know this. When students publish or when students do work and they get feedback, from wherever their feedback might come from, they're much more motivated and interested and engaged in their work. And so the assessment section really was about turning assessments into information that's very useful all the time, not thinking about assessments as that accountability thing that we've turned it into, but really turning assessment back into feedback for improvement.
Yeah, as I read that section, I really wondered about, we live in a world in which oftentimes there's so much information that it's hard to really grapple with what the information tells you and how it tells you that. Did the committee end up kind of having to go through that question of having a lot of data doesn't mean you're necessarily using the data well? So where do you put that responsibility?
You know what? That's a great question, and I'm going to have a hard time. Like I said earlier, the kind of evolution of ideas. I'm not sure if this was before the plan was published, but one of the things that we've definitely been talking about, and I know a lot of you are also thinking about this, is how do we use data to get the best thing back to the students and teachers. And so, for example, we've been thinking about how this happens in the consumer space and how are consumer companies getting better and better at targeting advertisements or targeting content for you. And the usual thing is like, well, you do the other people like you like this other stuff, which is now sounds very almost trivial, but to make that happen in education is not at all trivial. And so really trying to figure out how the data can really be turned into information and also turned into the next thing. I had somebody from Google tell me that the reason that you want to human tag content is so that the machine gets better and better and smarter at tagging content, right? So likewise, when I look at people's data systems, and they say, look at all this beautiful data, and now we're going to do all this professional development to teach teachers how to be analysts and understand what to do with the data. So on one level, that is excellent, and we do want teachers to really be incredibly data literate and understand, how to use data. On the other hand, we also then can use that information to make sure that what's returned to the student leverages the data, so that again in the case of consumer, it's the advertisements get more and more personal, but in the case of learning, it's what's fed back to the students as the next thing to do, or the next engagement, or the next data set to grapple with, or whatever, gets smarter and smarter and closer and closer to the most relevant thing that student could get next. So that's a little bit of a sort of a complex idea, but we've really been thinking about how data can be used to return to the students what is most useful, rather than simply just kind of collecting data and then asking teachers to manually read it and decide what to do all the time.
Well, that definitely comes through in the plan, or at least for me it did, in this sense that there are things we're going to need to learn. As the plan discusses the learning dashboard, I immediately thought of the Prius with some sense of, okay, here's what your fuel economy is, and the degree to which that kind of instant feedback drives is the wrong word in that context, but kind of motivates you. And it seems like that's a really powerful imagery, the sense that you get that same kind of regular feedback, and then we can figure out what feedback's working to help make a difference.
Exactly. And again, it gets smarter and smarter the more it's used.
Okay, so there's just no way we're going to get through all of the sections here. In infrastructure, I was really interested in the online learning communities, of course. And one of the things that my background brought to that section was the degree to which oftentimes participation in those communities is less about efficiency and more about a conversation and finding a comfortable place. Did you talk at all about balancing the desire to kind of centralize and encourage good formal structures with the kind of the way in which social networks develop at grassroots levels?
Yeah, no, you're talking about the teacher section, right? You said infrastructure, but I think you meant the teaching section.
Well, actually, online learning communities are mentioned in both, but you're right, so address it either way.
Okay. So the teaching section. The teaching section was actually the hardest section, and people have heard me talk about this before probably, but it was very difficult because we did not want to get to the end of the teaching section or somebody reading it and saying, oh, I get it, technology is going to replace teachers. kind of on the contrary, we want technology to totally power up teachers to help them be as successful as possible. And the notion that we ended up on was to say we want teachers to be highly connected. The best teachers that I know, or the most innovative or creative teachers, are also teachers who happen to be highly connected. They have their own kind of personal learning networks. They know where to get information. They have, again, teaching is a social art and science, so to speak. So that whole notion of the highly connected teacher was really, really an important and carefully thought out. At one point we were calling it highly instrumented, and we used the analogy of kind of the airline pilot who can fly manually, and we still want pilots in the airplanes, but we provide all of the instruments and the control tower and all of these other things to augment the skill of the pilot and help the pilot be as successful as possible. But the highly instrumented made it sound like it was all science and no art, and so we dropped that and talked about the highly connected teacher. But so that's just kind of to give you a sense of the thought process. But so one of the projects that we're doing now is we're launching kind of design research around this whole notion of communities of practice. And I know, again, people on this call are really involved in social networks and are highly connected. So we're trying to figure out, number one, what are the most successful and helpful, useful, timely practices that we can basically explode on the internet, so that teachers know where to go to find information, and not just lesson plan banks. It's kind of, we've said, oh, let's put up a teacher site, we'll put a bunch of lesson plans online, but rather, how do we make sure that teachers have what they need every single moment so that they can, again, be successful. So if they need access to an expert, if they need to collaborate with peers, if they want to attend, like this, a conversation online, so really try to figure out all the best practices for creating these communities of practice. But there's a part two to this whole design process that is, I think, really interesting if we can figure out how to do it. And this is really about who am I as a professional educator? And so if we could create this system whereby every professional educator had their own persistent profile, and they maintain their profile, kind of like your Facebook profile or your LinkedIn profile or whatever, but it's really kind of the launch space to who am I as a professional educator. And that would include things like, what am I interested in? What communities am I a part of? What have I contributed? What am I trying to figure out? And in this persistent profile, then, that would be the launch spot to go to a lot of different communities of practice that people are involved in. So, for example, you meet someone at a conference, and you're interested in what they're talking about, whether it be a peer that you meet in the hallway or someone you listen to speak. You can then find them online, much like in a friend network, but it's a professional network, and then you can see what are the communities that they're part of, and you can either aspire to be part of those communities, or you can just join them, or you can contribute to them, or you can learn from them, or whatever. So we're really trying to think about this ecosystem of interconnections, both to promote the professionalism of every individual teacher, and also to promote the profession and raise the profession up as a whole. We want to inspire, we want to kind of invigorate the profession, but overall help people to have what they need when and where they need it, and help them also to have an outlet for creative and interesting work that they're doing.
So it's intriguing because
So that's the teaching.
No, good. So as I look at the list of people in this call, there's so many here who I feel like fall into this area of having kind of stepped up through the grassroots to uncover or discover really unique and interesting ways of gathering people or creating those connections. And I just wonder where that will fall out. And maybe that's just something that will have to evolve. But somehow finding a way to still encourage that kind of innovation from those kind of people.
Oh, totally. And so, again, what we want to do is figure out the people who are the people on this call, all of you who are already have a very robust personal learning network, and you think about some other people that may work around you, And do they just ask you and you ask your personal learning network, or how do we help every single person, every professional educator, starting in pre-service, to begin to develop their learning network as well as their connections, again, in a very organic way and also a very organized way. And one of the things that we're talking about is we need to interview and do case studies with people who already are very connected and find out what are the most useful things, what are the time savers, what are the time sinks, what are the kinds of things that are most useful. So that's this project that we've embarked on.
Fascinating. Okay, in infrastructure, there's nice mention of open educational resources, but I didn't see any mention of open source software. Did it come up at all?
Yes, and I think that I'm not sure why there's not a, I actually can't think of the top of my head if there's a mention of it or not, but really, I mean, it's both. We definitely wanted to, and we still want to, we want to figure out the ways that free and fee-based resources can peacefully coexist, much like, you have the network televisions and then you have PBS. You have, we can, if we do this correctly, then the kinds of resources that you purchase are going to be purchased for a reason, and it's going to be because they're really, really good, and there's we want to sustain those and we want to make them better, and they're better than any of the stuff you can get for free, or they're different than the stuff you can get for free or whatever. But we want to create a situation where free software, open source software, open education resources, and fee-based, all of the above, really all have the opportunity to thrive, so to speak. They have a marketplace. One of the things that we definitely noticed and that we know is that the marketplace in education is incredibly fragmented. It's really difficult to sell into the education space, and I know I worked in corporate as well, so it's a fragmented space, whether you be a textbook publisher or a small startup or a large tech company or a service organization. You really need to go school to school, sometimes district to district, and hardly ever state to state to sell your wares. And we want to figure out how to fix the market so that the best tools and resources can find the people who need them.
So just a couple more quick questions from me, and we'll shift to Q&A. I made note of a couple of questions in the chat. If I asked them and I've missed yours, please post it again, or at the moment I'll have you raise your hand and you can ask a question through the microphone. Karen, the plan asks us to rethink some basic assumptions like seat time and age-determined groups. It also is pretty positive about student internet devices. As I was reading the plan, I kept thinking, how is the average parent going to feel about this? Do the parents represent kind of an intriguing constituency because sometimes they actually feel pretty good about how things are going and might be reluctant to see some of these changes?
I actually don't think we can generalize about parents. I've talked to a lot of parents over the last year, and some parents have the response of, my kid's fine, don't mess with this, but those are sometimes parents who have a lot of technology at home. Other parents who have a lot of technology at home are like, yes, please get this into school so my kid is not, disengaged in school and then engaged at home. Or please get this into the school so the kids who are, maybe not as engaged in school or causing problems or whatever have something to do. There are fabulous teachers have figured out how to engage kids with technology, without technology. So the role of technology really is, again, to power up what's happening. One of the things that we have, the chapter on productivity is really about how do we make sure that all of the barriers to creating the most productive learning environment possible are gone. So things like getting rid of seat time and going to a competency-based model, things like smoother transitions between what maybe was traditionally considered fourth grade to fifth grade, so that so more kind of seamless transitions between grade levels. So if a student does, progress faster, they're accommodated. The kinds of things that there's some discussion that states would have to grapple with on kind of the reciprocity agreements with online courses and teachers and that kind of thing. The kinds of things that we identified that are barriers to creating the most productive learning environment possible. And I want to say one other quick thing, because just as I listen to myself talk, sometimes I don't want anybody to think that we're talking about individualized learning as in everybody kind of plugs into a headphone and they get online and they do stuff at their own pace. On some page in the learning section, there's a sidebar that kind of defines individualized learning, differentiated learning, and personalized learning, with individualized learning being kind of everybody does the same stuff but at their own pace, differentiated learning being they do the stuff at their own pace, and we also offer different models, different methodologies for teaching and learning. And then personalized learning is bringing in that long tail of interest, and that every student isn't necessarily doing exactly the same thing. But personalized learning is also very participatory. So if you think about really the great challenges that kids can grapple with, or the kinds of problem-solving kinds of environments, or the more complex projects that students can work on, those are the kinds of things that we want to regain time in the school day, so that kids have time, energy, space to do those kinds of things, and that those things contribute to the kind of the common core, or the kinds of things that we want all students to learn.
Thanks, Karen. We are going to switch to Q&A now. I've made note of 4 or 5 questions, and if you would like to ask a question with the microphone, you can raise your hand. That's the hand arrow with the green hand icon with the green up arrow at the bottom of your participant window. Please do go up to Tools Audio and make sure that you've run the audio setup wizard before you do that. Karen, Skip said, in your opinion, how closely is this plan tied to political interests? When administrations change, what happens?
Well, that's a good question. And I think and I don't know if you're talking about administrations in terms of like the entire country, or if you're talking about like a school district administration. I mean, they're kind of all levels. But I think that what we really want to do is everything that we're thinking about, how do we really create a learning nation? How do we make sure that everybody who wakes up in the morning has the opportunity to learn what they need to learn, whether it be somebody who's 35 years old and needs to retrain and get a new job and decides to be a medical technician, but realizes that they don't have the math skills to do so. So we are really trying to do things that are not dependent on get some things really sort of institutionalized, or kind of practices that would survive a kind of a change in administration. We really talk a lot about transparency and making sure people understand kind of decisions that are made and why, and publishing a lot of things, information, data sets, and those kinds of things. I think all of those things will be practices that kind of can live on. I think that sustainability is incredibly important, and we're really trying to focus in on those kinds of things that would live on. Back to the competency and seat model, seat time environment. If we can move to some of those more productive practices, I think those are the kinds of things that would survive past an administration. Back to the question about devices, if we can get to a point where students, as a matter of practice, just like they have in the past had a bucket full of textbooks, if we could get to the point where each student has a device that is full of textbooks or full of materials or learning resources or whatever comes beyond textbooks, that's something I think that will live on, that we couldn't go back to a practice of handing them a large pile of textbooks if we get this more institutionalized.
So Peggy makes the point that she was listening to Chris Lehman from Science Leadership Academy, where they had a conference this weekend called EduCon. And Chris said, everything in the plan was Science Leadership Academy. He was very enthusiastic about it. However, he felt it was very different from the federal direction for education, such as the Race to the Top and NCLB. Do you hear that often?
You know, I do hear it sometimes. But I think what we're trying to do is build a better bridge between all of the things happening with technology. And this has been really, I've been here a year, and some of the work really is trying to get a broader understanding. And I'll tell you, there's been an amazing amount of progress in this, but a broader understanding about how technologies can really, again, as I said, help support all the different goals of ESEA reauthorization or of everything that's happening across the department. And that is actually becoming more understandable. Really the whole concept of Race to the Top is to say, here are some things that we think will move the needle, some things that would evolve education reforms, and see what people can do with them. I think that there have been some amazing things happening in the state of California with the 7 superintendents who got together to really kind of craft their Race to the Top response. They didn't get funded, but they have an amazing, huge leap forward in the kinds of work that they will do together. The superintendents will do together. So I think there's more synergy than it may seem like, but it's an incredibly complex environment, and so it's hard to articulate. I'll say one last thing about that, and that is that just in December, and I don't know how interesting this is to people, to me it was fascinating because 3 White House offices came together to have a convening on learning technologies. So a year ago, that was very far from their thinking. So the National Economic Council, the Domestic Policy Council, and the Office of Science and Technology Policy were the 3 offices. The Office of Science and Technology Policy, obviously, they do think about learning technologies, but the Domestic Policy Council, the National Economic Council, really hadn't, put emphasis on learning technologies. And so, again, there's a lot of progress happening across government.
Karen, Skip asks, how can we encourage teacher preparation programs to prepare teachers toward the ends in this document?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that a couple things. One is this community of practice work that we're doing. If we can start building in some of these common practices into the pre-service so that teachers, when they're going to want aspiring teachers, begin to see themselves in a profession that is highly connected. That's one thing. The second thing, I think that's a lot about, muscle memory, so to speak. And so I think it was Kyle Peck at Penn State that said that teachers have 15,000 hours of muscle memory about what it's like to sit in a classroom when they go into teaching. So pre-service teachers have sort of a preconceived notion about what it is to be a teacher and what it feels like to be a learner, mostly in a traditional setting. And so part of what has to happen in teacher education is to provide teachers the opportunity and the experience and what it feels like to be a learner in a very kind of involved, challenging, problem-solving type of a setting. So I think that's something that needs. We also need to power up our higher education environment so that people kind of see themselves as learners.
I think that's been one of the great themes of Web 2.0 and sort of the edublogosphere or the personal learning networks, is that so many of those who are active and who have then created their own kind of unique new ideas got re-engaged in the profession through their own learning process.
Absolutely. I think that's so, one of the things that we. Go ahead.
Telephone lag, but it's your turn.
Okay. What I was just going to say about learning is one of the things that everybody can do back at home or with their their constituents is really engage everybody in that conversation about what it means to learn in the 21st century. So you can ask parents, you can ask business people, whoever, when you ask them, if you wake up in the morning and need to learn something new, what do you do? And you start really engaging people in the conversation about what it means to be a learner. And then, usually they talk about things about, going online or doing a search or figuring out the questions or reaching out to their friends or their social networks or whatever. And so once you start to drill down on what it means to be a learner, it sets kind of a nice framework for the kinds of learning environments that we're trying to incorporate into our schools.
I love that. And I'm wondering, did the committee talk at all about the kind of programs that people like Tony Wagner at Harvard and others have done where they really encourage local meetings of parents, teachers, and administrators and students to talk about education?
I don't know that we specifically talked about that in the plan, but I definitely think so. And I think that an incredibly important constituency group is students, obviously. Tom Kelly with IDEO talks about, when he talks kind of the 10 Phases of Innovation, one of his practices that he totally advocates, which seems like it would be second nature to teachers and folks in schools, but it isn't necessarily. But he talks about having a reverse mentor, somebody who is much younger than you, maybe a student, maybe a young teacher or whatever, that you meet with that mentors you as a professional. Like, who is it that can give you a sense of the world from maybe a different perspective?
Okay, so we have a couple minutes left. If you have a question for Karen that I have missed in the chat, please post it again. I did combine a few questions that were somewhat related. If you would like to raise your hand and ask a question using the microphone, please feel free to do so. That's the hand with the green up arrow. Karen, it feels like there are so many different views of education. As I kind of thought of some of the of KIPP, Big Picture Schools, High Tech High, Florida Virtual School, I've wondered why we have such good examples that often get ignored. And did you see a way in which technology could help that?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. You know what, one of the things that I think too, we have not in this country at all figured out how to scale up practices. So there's a couple reasons, I think. One is that we have this notion of evidence, and we have this notion that we need to do kind of intensive research before we believe something is a good idea and that it will help kids learn. And so I'm not saying evidence is a bad thing, but I think we need to figure out how to take things to scale very fast and then very quickly get information about it and see if it's working. But I think that there is, for the systems and the programs that work, if you talk to people that are working in some of these either charter management organizations or some of the design frameworks for schools that have been somewhat catching on, they catch on at an incredibly slow rate. The expansion capacity is very slow. And I don't think we've figured out how to leverage technology to scale up the environments. So for example, if you take, New Tech High, a year or so ago, I met with some folks from New Tech High, and they spent something like 20 to 40 hours designing projects. And that is all well and good, but it's not sustainable. And so a system whereby people can design once and perfect over and over and over again, or maybe customize a little bit for your classroom. I think we need to get to these scenarios where people are not having to recreate the wheel. And part of this is because our best materials for schools have been in the form of textbooks. And, I don't have any problem with, the best textbooks, but textbooks are inherently print-based, and print is inherently disabled in this day and age. It can't take you deeper. It can't, hyperlink to other things. It can't show you pictures or videos or simulations, and it can't bring to life. It can't connect you with other people. So if you think about teachers that have been having to figure stuff out by themselves over and over and over again, we have not figured out how to scale out the kinds of practices that are the most engaging, interesting, inspiring kinds of projects. We need to leverage technology to do that.
I'm intrigued by how often it seems like a pressing demand will create the change where years of pedagogy and policy were not able to. And in particular, I'm thinking of funding issues driving the adoption of online learning in districts in order to keep students in the district. Do you see some places where that's really making a difference, where some very practical realities are driving people to appropriate adoption?
Yeah, I think going forward, it is going to be this crazy budget crisis that is going to require people to think differently about the kinds of learning opportunities that we're giving to students. I think we're going to have to leverage technologies. We're going to have to leverage online environments. We're going to have to leverage experts. We don't have the experts in the STEM subjects that we need, and we won't in our professional lifetime. Even if we do a fantastic job of recruiting and training, we still won't be able to staff up every single school. So we have to come up with better online environments that we can scale out experts and then develop the people that are in classrooms to be great facilitators, great coaches, maybe in some cases rolling up their sleeves right alongside the students and learning with them, and maybe aspiring to be better and better every single year. But I think that we really do need to figure out, and I think the budget crisis is going to push us to figure out better ways and much more productive ways of providing the best possible learning environment for every student.
Karen, is there a reason that there was a 6-year gap between the previous plan and this one?
Only by statute that Congress asked for one every 5 years. I think this one got started 5 years out, but this one took, about, I guess it was about a year and a half to complete.
Okay, so it was within I didn't realize there was a 5-year pattern there. How long are you likely to be in this role?
That's a great question. I will stay here for the Obama administration.
Okay.
It's my current idea. That's my current plan, is to support the Obama administration. It's a tremendously invigorating and interesting place to be. The State of the Union speech last week, focused on 3 things, and that was learning, or education, innovation, and infrastructure. And in the education space, obviously powering up education for every single student. In the innovation space, we're talking all about innovation and innovative learning environments and how do we leverage the best possible innovations to, again, power up learning. And then in the infrastructure space, we're talking about broadband and building out the learning infrastructure in the country. So it's incredibly aligned, the goals of the Obama administration, and it's just an incredibly interesting place to be. So I'm here for the time being.
Karen, thank you so much for making the time to be a part of this. I'm clapping for you. You can use the clapping hand.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I have one question for all the listeners. I would love to hear from you specifically on the notion of how you learn and how do you think about your own personal learning network and the places that you go, and what are your practices around being a highly connected professional educator?
And how do you want them to respond to you?
Oh, you know what? Do you have a website they can put it on? Can they respond inside a blog on your site?
Yeah, I will post a forum discussion on that very topic, and we'll make it a part of the recording link so that people know they can respond there.
That would be fantastic. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Karen. Thanks everybody for coming. Really appreciate it. Don't forget tomorrow, David Wiley. On Thursday, Karen Hume. Then we take a week break, and David Perkins starts us up on his book, Making Learning Whole. The recording will be up within the hour, both the MP3 and the Illuminate recording. Karen, really appreciate it. Want to let you go because I know your time is tight. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, everybody. That was a lot of fun. Karen Cator on transforming American education, learning powered by technology. I'm going to go ahead and turn the recording off. In order for it to process, we do need to have you exit the room. So you can click on the X at the top right or go to File and Exit, and I'll get that recording up as soon as I can. Take care, everybody. Have a great night.